Welcome to On Texas Football. It's time for our Saturday morning conversation. I have a special guest with me today, none other than Craig Way, the voice of the Texas Longhorns. Craig, thanks for joining the show, bud.
Hey, it's always great to see you again, Bobby. We go back a ways and then some, so it's always great to be on with you.
I think it's been 30 years, Craig. I really do. We talk about that like time just passes, and then all of a sudden you're there and it's over and done with. But we're still kicking, dude. We're still kicking.
Hey,
I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming on. I
Yeah,
really do.
listen, I still tell people by that time you and I sat on the front porch there, that house in Denison, doing the recruiting show. And I believe it was Denard Whitfield who was the recruit. And there were two large dogs, and we were both concerned. And Denard and his mom both said, "Don't worry, they're not going to bother you." And it was kind of a nervous interview, but we got through it.
Yes. Well, we go back. I mean, it's got to be 30 years. It really does. But
Yeah.
I would say this for people that don't know Craig, he's not only the voice of the Longhorns. And this show, Craig, that's interesting. It's not just, local in the state of Texas or even to Austin. It's nationwide. It's worldwide. So a lot of people don't actually get a chance to hear you on the radio. I want to plug you for that. You're on 1300 The Zone every day from 2 to 5. As well as being the voice of the Longhorns. But Craig, I'm going to go and just talk about your career, what you've meant to the Longhorns, maybe ask you some questions about this coming season. I also want to say thank you for this. I mean, I started this podcast about 2 years ago, and you were one of my very first guests. So this is the first time I've asked you back, and I appreciate you helping me kick this whole thing off. Way back. But let's start with how did you get into this business for people that haven't heard about you and your story and how you ended up at the University of Texas?
Well, I grew up in North Carolina, actually, and my high school was kind of ahead of the curve in the mid to late 70s, which tells you a little bit about how old I am. But anyway, they had their own closed circuit television studio in the school, and the television production class produced a live newscast, news, weather, sports, special features, and reports every morning in homeroom from 8:30 to 9 a.m. And I went in as a freshman and auditioned for the sports anchor job and got it. And did that throughout the course of 180 days of school, anchoring a morning sportscast, and that got my interest in it. And then my first actual play-by-play that I ever did, Bobby, was the championship game of the homeroom basketball tournament in the spring of 1975, as Mr. Busick's homeroom defeated Miss Unger's homeroom 21-14 in a basketball game there. And I remember calling play-by-play of that. We had a 3-camera shoot, and 2 were on top of the stage at the end of the gym floor, like you see, and then 1 was at midcourt. And it was pretty cool. It was kind of ahead of its time for back then. It was black and white, but it was still pretty cool. And you might say the play-by-play bug bit me there. So it started from that. I moved to Texas. My parents had moved to Texas in 78, and I came out and ended up eventually at North Texas, where they have a fabulous broadcast program, and learned under the great direction and tutelage of Bill Mercer, who folks may recall. Bill was the Cowboys play-by-play voice in the 60s, including the Ice Bowl game against Green Bay and their first Super Bowl, their first 2 Super Bowl games, and the first one they won, Super Bowl VI. He left the Cowboys after that 71 season, became the Texas Rangers' first play-by-play voice, did it for a couple of years, and then went and worked, did the White Sox for a couple of years, but he taught at North Texas and did the play-by-play for the Mean Green for 35 years, and he kind of took me under wing, and I was 3 weeks into his sports broadcasting class when he put me on the air with him, and then we worked together for 6 years. So during that time, in Denton, I also landed my first job as a morning drive news tape editor at KRLD, and that was a part-time thing, but Brad Chan brought me into sports full-time as I was finishing up school in 85. So I was at KRLD for 12 years. During that time, and this is the connection to Texas, KRLD was then, and still is, the Longhorn Sports Radio Network affiliate for Dallas-Fort Worth. Well, at the time, it was part of the old Southwest Conference Radio Network, and they needed a new studio anchor, and they hired me to do the studio anchor work, and I did it for all the 9 Southwest Conference schools, and then Arkansas left, and then that network broke up. Host Communications carried it forward, and they brought in other schools as well. So for a couple of years, in 90 and 91, I was the studio anchor for Texas, but also for Army, Navy, Pitt, Florida State, and Alabama. And it was all coming in. And you would do a scoreboard update, say, for Texas, a pregame, and say, blah, 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 we'll get you out to the stadium when Longhorn football continues in a moment. And then I'd hear a voice in my ear, stand by, you got a Navy halftime. And then you would do that. Then you have an Army postgame. Then you have a pregame for Alabama and all that. And it was a great experience for a couple of years. That was 90 and 91. And then in 1992, Bill Schoening moved from the analyst role to the play-by-play role, and they asked me at that point if I wanted to become the analyst. So I went into the booth as the analyst with him. We did 10 football and 9 basketball seasons together with Bill as the play-by-play voice, and I was the analyst. Bill left after the football season of 2001 to become the voice of the Spurs, and that's when I moved over to play-by-play in 2001. So, yeah, it's going into 24 years of play-by-play for Texas. And I'd actually started doing the women's games a few years prior to that, because by then I'd moved down to Austin, and Bill and I were doing a show that you were on many times here on The Zone, which went all sports in 1998. So it started through all of that, and I started doing the women's basketball a couple of years prior to that. So I'm still doing the women's games as well as the football, the men's basketball, and baseball, and love every minute of it.
That's great stuff, Craig. A lot of people know you also from high school. You mentioned me, and when you and I first got to really know each other, I was covering recruiting and around the state of Texas. We were doing the high school sports show for recruiting. You were doing the Texas High School Extra, that sort of stuff. I've got to ask you a couple questions about high school before we get going. You've been, and you're still doing the state championship games. You told me before we started filming this today that you actually were doing the high school state baseball championships this past week. So it's still in your blood. I've got to ask you, what's your favorite high school game that you ever done and called? And then what is your favorite high school football stadium around the state of Texas? Because the second one, I have one. I want to see what it compares to you. But what's your favorite game you've ever called, and then your favorite stadium?
Well, that's a tough question. I mean, obviously, I've been very, very fortunate and blessed, and had a lot of really good games to call. I know a lot of folks remember the Hail Mary game with Galena Park North Shore beating Duncanville, and that would have been up there. But I will tell you that the year before that might have been an even better game. Highland Park and Manville in that 5A Division I game, a 50-49 game that went back and forth and came down to a play at the end, a Hail Mary where Jalen Preston was dragged down at the 1-yard line by a 140-pound safety, and it ended the game on that play. I think about that. That was a tremendous game. I did a game in 1995, a 2A game between Salina and Alto. And Salina was the number 1 team in the state, and Alto was the number 2 team in the state. And it lived up to the billing. Here were a couple of communities that maybe 4,000, 5,000 total residents combined between the two communities. And they had over 18,000 at Texas Stadium that night. And it had 7 lead changes, and it was worth every bit of the billing. And Salina won at 32-28. I will also tell you this. For everybody who remembers, and I understandably so, the Rose Bowl win over USC, which was a great opportunity at the collegiate level to call that, and Vince Young scoring the game-winning touchdown. 3 weeks prior to that, I did another 41-38 game, and it was Tatum defeating Hutto to win the 3A Division II state championship. And Jeremy Curley was playing for Hutto, and it was a tremendous game, back and forth, much like that Texas USC game. So right after that Texas USC game, I'll never forget this. I'm walking out of the broadcast booth, headed to the press box elevator. Jackie Sherrill, who was doing some commentary for Fox Sports Net, comes out and he gives me a big hug, and he goes, "When have you called a game like that?" I said, 3 weeks ago, Tatum Hutto. And he's like, what? It was tremendous. So all of those games come to mind. There was one in 1992, South Lake Carroll's #1 in the state, and Vernon's #2 in the state, and they're 3A unbeaten. And it was on the Friday night, Black Friday weekend of Thanksgiving weekend. We knew whoever won that game was going to win the 3A state championship. South Lake Carroll back then, a 3A school, a little farming community at the time. And the game was at Pennington Field in Bedford, which held 10,000. The official attendance was 14,897. The stories were legendary of TCU students down at the West End charging $2 to heft people over the wall so they could get in. It was, and it lived up to the bill. It was a 39-35 game. So all of those games come to mind. They're just wonderful games. As far as stadiums go, I think it's kind of like how I classify it with baseball parks, the new breed, like I say, green seats and lots of suites, and the old parks like Wrigley Field and Fenway. I think you could do the same with high school football, the old WPA project stadiums like Old Munson Stadium in Denison, which is no longer there, the Tomato Bowl in Jacksonville, which has undergone a renovation, the neat little old historic house park here in Austin. All of those come to mind. And then you have these new palaces. They're just incredible. Berry Center in the Cy-Fair ISD, Freedom Field down south of Houston in the Alvin ISD. Beautiful palaces, McKinney, Allen. Those are all great stadiums. And I like both the old and the new.
Mine's the Tomato Bowl. It is. Yeah. Mine's the Tomato Bowl. That's interesting that you mentioned that about Jackie Sherrill and the Rose Bowl game. That's who I sat next to at the Rose Bowl.
Did you really?
Yeah, I literally sat next to three people. There was one person in front of me that was Gary Miller, the old ESPN commentator. He was there doing stuff for Fox. Then Jackie Sherrill was on my left, and the play-by-play announcer of the Cal Bears, the guy that did the game with the lateral, he called that. He was the one that was doing it. He was on my other side doing something for the Pac, I guess it was Pac-10 network at that time. And I was sitting there, and
Joe Starkey, by the way. Joe Starkey.
What's that?
Joe Starkey.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, absolutely. So I was talking to Jackie Sherrill during that game, and at the end of the game, I look over and I go, "What do you think?" He goes, and he was talking specifically about Vince Young. He said, "Never seen anything like number 10." That's what he said after that game, and he's seen a lot of good players. That was just after maybe 2 or 3 years after he had retired, I think, from coaching at all. Hey, I got to ask you that the 4th and 5 call is world famous, but particularly in Texas lore. I asked you this one time before. Where did you come up with that? I mean, was that just spur of the moment, or was that years of practice coming to fruition for you?
Bobby, I learned a long time ago, at least for me. Now, this does not apply to everybody, but I learned a long time ago that if I tried to rehearse something or come up with something, I would screw it up. And I thought the best way to do it is just whatever comes to my mind. This really started by back in 2002 when Longhorn baseball won the national championship. And when they were getting ready to play South Carolina in 2002, I had a lot of people ask, "What are you going to say? What are you going to say?" And I was like, I don't know. I really didn't know. And Keith Moreland was working with me. Keith, of course, played on the 1975 national championship team. And, of course, was a big part of Longhorn Network's coverage all the years doing baseball in later years. And Keith brings it out of the break for the top of the 9th inning as South Carolina's coming to bat. And he goes, "Here to take you home. Here's Craig's going to fit it." And Keith went down to the field. Well, the leadoff guy gets on against Houston Street. The next guy hits a comebacker to Street. He turns and starts a 1-4-3 double play. All of a sudden, it's 2 outs. And it just hit me at the moment. I'm like, oh, my gosh, it's about to end. And the next guy comes up. And the only thing that I could think of that came to my mind was Keith talking about when they won the 1975 national championship, when the plane touched down, when they came back, I guess the next day or whatever, in the evening, seeing the tower lit orange. And so it was a ground ball to Jeff Onaveris at first. He runs to the bag, and I said, "Light the tower orange," because that's what came to mind. And then 3 years later, when they won in Omaha again in 2005, Tom Holliday was the pitching coach and said, "You're going to say, light the tower again, aren't you?" And I said, I hadn't really planned on it because it needs to. He goes, "Oh, no, you got to say it. I wasn't here in 2002. You got to say it." And so what I did was that was the only thing that went through my mind. I said, for the sixth time in school history, you could light the tower orange. As far as the football play went, the whole thing was just to deal with what was coming to my mind was, everybody had all these hopes and dreams about what Texas could do to win a national championship. And that's why it came out the way it did. All the dreams, all the hopes of the national championship come down to this play. And here was 4th and 5, and then he gets in. I said, he's done it again, because I'd seen him do it over and over, come up with big moments like that. That's how it was, completely unrehearsed, completely unthought of. And probably if I had tried to come up with something pithy or rehearsed or whatever, I'd probably have fumbled it and messed it up. So that's how it came out the way that it came out.
Craig, this is great stuff. I got to ask you, we're moving into a new era. I mean, we're older guys now, right? We saw the creation of the Big 12. Now we're seeing the dissolution of it, or at least Texas's exit from it, along with Oklahoma. Texas re-entering, or going into the SEC, along former Southwest Conference foes A&M, as well as Arkansas. So it's kind of a full circle moment in some ways, but there's also a new look. I mean, the SEC is a different conference. What are you feeling right now and what are you looking forward to more or less from that standpoint as you look at it from the Texas viewpoint and that lens?
Bobby, I think we've seen or heard over the past couple of years, I know you have as well as I have, where people go, is Texas ready? Are they ready for the Big 12? Is Oklahoma ready? Can they make, and I do think as a total athletic program, they're definitely ready. We've seen what the football program can do, reaching the CFP. That would tell me that they're ready for this. I understand that it's a weekly grind every week, and there will be no off Saturdays. And really and truly, I think you saw it as well, it was rare to have those kind of off Saturdays in the Big 12 also. You'd see Kansas rise up, not only upset Texas, but upset Oklahoma. We've seen Kansas State do it several times. Iowa State, tough place to go into Ames. So it wasn't a conference where you could just go in and say you're cruising through it. We know the SEC isn't built that way either. So that the big question is, are they ready for it? I think mentally now they're ready for it. It took Longhorn fans, I think, a little bit of time from the time this was announced initially back a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, whatever, to get ready for this. And so now I think they are ready. I think they're definitely ready academically, and I think they're ready competitively in just about every sports. They just won the Learfield Directors Cup, emblematic of the nation's top athletic program for the third time in 4 years. Does that mean they're going to go out and win the SEC football crown their first year? I don't know. We'll see. I think they're ready to be competitive in the league and have a chance to do it. And I think you can say the same thing in the other sports, in basketball, men's and women's, in baseball, golf, tennis, track and field, I think swimming and diving. I think they're ready to go in just about every other area.
Yeah, I got to ask you, this season, to your point, Texas made the college football playoff in football this past year. Big move for Steve Sarkisian after 5-7 and then 8-5. It was one that Texas fans had hoped for, but everything sort of came together and coalesced, right? This season, it's a little bit different. More expectations. Despite what looks like a harder schedule, right? And I just want to get your take on this upcoming season as they look forward to 2024 and see if you have any thoughts, nuances, comments that you want to add to the discussion. Because I know you see it and you've seen it all these years, right? You get a sense for how a season plays out and what the storyline is, so to speak. What do you see that as this year's storyline for the University of Texas?
I think it goes back to this thing, what we're talking about are they ready for it? And what readiness means is, and you know this as well, are you ready from a recruiting element? Sark has had to stack recruiting classes. He's been able to do that, and you've got to do that before you can even be really competitive on an annual basis. You've seen it. The depth has to be there in that league. Well, I think they've built that. Now, they do have some unproven areas. There's no question about it. We've seen, what they might be able to do in the backfield with a C.J. Baxter and a Jaden Blue, but they don't have Jonathan Brooks there anymore. So it's their moment. Can they step step up and do it? Can the defensive line off the edge and in the secondary and even in some linebacking spots make those plays that they have to make to have winning football week by week? And then what everybody's wanting to know is this the stair-step progression we've seen from Quinn Ewers from the start, and is he now a legitimate Heisman Trophy candidate quarterback? Whether or not he's a legitimate Heisman candidate, I don't think is as impactful as whether he's ready to guide this team, and I think he is, to be able to take them where they have to go. And I know there's the great expectation for Arch Manning, and Arch and his family have handled this superbly about his readiness level rolling up to be ready if something should happen to Quinn. And he's been banged up the last couple of years at points in the season. So his readiness will also be one of the critical moments. But I think this is also Quinn Ewers' time to try to lead this team into a high ground in the SEC.
Yeah, I agree with you. And when we talk about it, whether it's with you or Jerry Hamilton, Rod Babers, anybody we talk about this stuff with, it's always about, can Quinn take the next step, whatever that looks like, and then can the rest of the team kind of prove that they're as good as the guys that just left? I mean, at some level, you had guys just go to the league, whether it's Ryan Watts, Byron Murphy, Tavondre Sweat, Christian Jones at right tackle, underrated. You got Amari Niblack and Gunnar Helm trying to replace JT Sanders. You mentioned it yourself about Jonathan Brooks and how they're going to have to pick up those carries. So I think that you're right. You follow Texas football recruiting and all the machinations around it. They've done a great job recruiting. Now go prove it. This is to me, it's a little bit of a prove it year. Now last year you took the Horns and ran with it, right? They came through. Now it's almost proven. Prove you're one of the elite teams in college football on an annual basis.
Bobby, I'm as anxious as you probably are to hear what Sark will say at SEC Media Days, because remember, at Big 12 Media Days, they weren't shying away from the projection that they should win the Big 12. He goes, that's what we've said. Everything that's being said, he goes, we've already said that to the team. He said, now we have to prove it. And he talked about the embrace the hate thing and all that in the last year. Well, now they're the newbies coming in along with Oklahoma, but they come in with some cachet and they come in with experience. And I think all of that helps. But to your point, ultimately, proof in the pudding. We'll see how they do when they step on the field.
Yep. All right. Craig Way, I can't appreciate it more, Craig, that you joined us here on Texas Football. Best of luck in your 24th season as voice of the Texas Longhorns. Also, again, reach out and listen to Craig on The Zone, 1300 AM, on The Zone from 2 to 5 every weekday. Craig, I appreciate you so much, buddy. Hook 'em.
Hey, hook 'em, Bobby, anytime. Glad to be on with you.